picture this. You're living in like a seemingly idyllic community. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors.
Mm.
And the biggest worry is who's bringing dessert to the next potluck,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Then one day, a respected judge vanishes
Oh.
without a trace. And suddenly, the veneer of tranquility, it just shatters, revealing a dark underbelly of organized crime, corruption, and just cold-blooded murder. And that's exactly what happened in 1950s Florida,
Wow.
a time and place not so different from our own. This is the story of the Chillingworth case, a tale so twisted it earned this ominous title, Florida's Crime of the Century. We're diving deep into this case today, guided by the excellent podcast Chillingworth, which is packed with first-hand accounts
Yeah.
and archival footage.
What's fascinating here is that even though this case dates back to 1955, it still captures the imagination, the brutality of the crime, the audacity of the perpetrators, and the lasting impact on the community. I think it makes it a story that continues to resonate. It's a stark reminder that the darkness we see in the news today is not new. It's part of a larger tapestry of human behavior that repeats itself throughout history.
Absolutely. And to truly grasp the gravity of this case, we need to step back in time to June 15th, 1955. A contractor arrives at Judge Curtis Chillingworth's beach house for a routine repair and instead stumbles upon a scene straight out of Nightmare. The judge and his wife, Marjorie, they're gone, vanished without a trace. There's no sign of a struggle, no ransom note, just an unsettling silence hanging in the air.
The Chillingworth's beach house, located in Manalapan, Florida, was supposed to be like a haven for the couple. They were planning to host their family there soon. Instead, it became the starting point of a mystery that would grip the nation.
And remember, the judge, he wasn't just any judge. He was known for his integrity and punctuality, a true pillar of the community. He was particularly admired for his fairness towards women and black defendants, which was pretty remarkable for Florida back then. He was, by all accounts, a good man, a man of principle.
This makes his disappearance even more perplexing. There's no obvious motive, no immediate suspects, just a chilling absence that leaves everyone wondering, could this happen to anyone?
Exactly, and that's what made it so unsettling for everyone. Think about it. A respected judge, a loving husband, gone without a trace. The community was terrified. Imagine the fear that gripped the community. The whispers of who could be next. The reward offered for information was a staggering $15,250, almost $180,000 in today's money. That's how desperate they were for answers.
That reward,
Yeah.
when you put it into today's context, it really underscores the gravity of the situation. It speaks to the fear and uncertainty that permeated the community. This wasn't just a missing persons case. It was a threat to the very fabric of their society.
And amidst this climate of fear and suspicion, one name kept surfacing: Judge Joe Peel. Now, he wasn't just any lawyer. He was also a county magistrate, which meant he had the power to sign search warrants, a position of significant authority.
To understand the significance of that role, you have to remember that a county magistrate in those days had a lot of power, especially in a rapidly growing state like Florida. They were responsible for upholding the law, issuing warrants, and ensuring justice was served.
But alongside his official duties, rumors swirled that Joe Peel was involved in some shady dealings, tipping off racketeers about upcoming raids, and living a lifestyle far beyond his magistrate's salary.
These whispers of corruption, juxtaposed against Judge Chillingworth's impeccable reputation, created a stark contrast. It's almost like a classic tale of good versus evil, playing out against the backdrop of Florida's booming post-war economy.
It really does feel like something out of a movie, doesn't it?
It is.
And to make matters even more complicated, Joe Peel and Judge Chillingworth had crossed paths before, and it wasn't pretty. 2 years prior to the disappearance, Peel had actually appeared before Judge Chillingworth for a serious ethical violation. He had represented both the husband and the wife in a divorce case, a major conflict of interest. That could have gotten him disbarred.
Disbarment is essentially the ultimate punishment for a lawyer. It means being stripped of your license to practice law. It's a career-ending move. So for Peel, being called before Judge Chillingworth for this violation would have been a major blow to his reputation and ambitions.
And to add insult to injury, the sentence Judge Chillingworth handed down was considered by many to be surprisingly lenient. Some speculated that Peel had used his connections to secure a lighter punishment.
This perceived leniency is crucial because it fueled speculation about a potential motive for Peel. Did he hold a grudge against Chillingworth? Did he see the judge as an obstacle to his ambitions?
Well, following Chillingworth's disappearance, things went from bad to worse for Joe Peel. He was embroiled in yet another misconduct case, this time for failing to finalize a client's divorce. This meant she unknowingly entered into a second marriage, committing bigamy, without even realizing it.
Imagine the chaos that must have caused for that woman. Bigamy was a serious offense back then, carrying significant social stigma and legal repercussions. It's another example of how Peel's actions, whether intentional or not, had a devastating impact on those around him.
It really paints a picture of someone who was either incredibly careless or intentionally manipulative. Public pressure mounted, and he was ultimately forced to resign as magistrate, a major fall from grace.
This resignation was a turning point. Peel's reputation was tarnished, and he was ostracized from the legal community he had once aspired to lead. It's a classic example of how unchecked ambition can lead to self-destruction.
And instead of laying low and trying to rebuild his life, he doubled down on his shady dealings, partnering with a former client named Floyd Holzendorf, a man deeply embedded in organized crime.
This partnership is a classic example of the downward spiral, when someone starts cutting corners and associating with the wrong crowd. It often leads to further compromise and eventually a complete disregard for the law.
And that disregard for the law led to some truly horrifying events, the most shocking of which unfolded in December of 1956 at a place called the Chi-Chi Club. Picture this, a bustling nightclub, famous for its Mermaid Act, a place where people went to escape their worries and enjoy a night out. But on this particular night, the mermaids weren't the main attraction.
The Chi-Chi Club incident was pivotal because it solidified suspicions around Joe Peel and Floyd Holzendorf. It showed their willingness to use violence, and it gave State Attorney Philip O'Connell the leverage he needed to investigate their potential involvement in the Chillingworth case.
So here's what went down. Joe Peel brings an associate of his, Harold Gray, to the Chi-Chi Club when it's closed. No one around except for the staff. Waiting inside is Floyd Holzendorf. And without warning, he attacks Harold Gray, attempting to bludgeon him to death with a leather mace.
The brutality of this attack is shocking, and the reason behind it is even more chilling. It turns out Joe Peel had taken out a $100,000 life insurance policy on Harold Gray, forging his signature, and adding a double indemnity clause for death by murder.
A double indemnity clause basically means that the insurance payout doubles. If the death is ruled a murder, talk about cold-blooded. In today's money, that policy would be worth close to $1 million.
This detail highlights Joe Peel's ruthlessness and his willingness to exploit and endanger others for financial gain. It's a chilling reminder of the dark underbelly of ambition, how the pursuit of wealth and power can corrupt even those who seem to have it all.
It's absolutely mind-boggling. You have to wonder what kind of person could orchestrate such a scheme.
It speaks to a certain level of detachment from reality, a belief that one is above the law and can manipulate situations to their advantage, even if it means taking a life.
Amazingly, Harold Gray survived the attack. But it wasn't the last time Joe Peel would try to have him killed. He actually attempted it a second time. Talk about persistence.
This persistence reveals a disturbing pattern of behavior. Joe Peel seemed to believe he was above the law, that he could control the narrative and manipulate the outcome, no matter the cost.
But the incident at the Chi-Chi Club wasn't their only brush with the law. In 1958, the body of another man connected to organized crime was found. And guess who was a suspect? Floyd Holzendorf. It seems like everywhere you turn, these two are leaving a trail of chaos and violence in their wake.
This discovery further connected Joe Peel and Floyd Holzendorf to the criminal underworld and strengthened the belief that they were capable of violence, potentially even murder. It provided crucial evidence for State Attorney O'Connell, who was determined to crack the Chillingworth case.
And here's where it gets really interesting. O'Connell knew that Joe Peel and Floyd Holzendorf were already feuding over money, likely from their various illicit activity, so he decided to use that to his advantage. He realized that their greed and distrust of each other could be their undoing.
This strategy was ingenious by exploiting the existing tension between Joe Peel and Floyd Holzendorf. O'Connell could potentially pit them against each other and gain valuable information about the Chillingworth case. It was a high-stakes gamble, but the potential payoff was enormous.
So they set up an elaborate undercover operation, using a crooked insurance agent and a bail bondsman, both associates of Joe Peel and Floyd Holzendorf. They bugged a motel room in Melbourne, Florida, where the three men were supposed to meet.
Bugging a room in those days was no small feat. It involved bulky equipment and a lot of risk. But the information they hoped to gather was worth it. If they could get Floyd Holzendorf to confess, they might finally have the breakthrough they needed to solve the Chillingworth case.
And that's exactly what happened. The three men got incredibly drunk, and Floyd Holzendorf, completely unaware that he was being recorded, started bragging about his role in the murders. He even laughed as he described the horrifying details.
This confession, captured on those grainy, reel-to-reel tapes, provided a chilling glimpse into the minds of the killers and the events that led to the Chillingworth's demise. It was a key piece of evidence that would ultimately bring Joe Peel to justice.
It's hard to fathom how someone could boast about such a heinous act. But according to Floyd Holzendorf's drunken confession, Joe Peel had hired him and another man, Bobby Lincoln, to carry out the murders. He was terrified that Judge Chillingworth would disbar him, derailing his political ambitions.
This motive, while seemingly petty, speaks to a chilling level of narcissism and a complete lack of empathy. Joe Peel was willing to sacrifice innocent lives to protect his own reputation and advance his career. It's a stark reminder that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It's absolutely sickening to think that someone's ambition could be so blinding.
It's a scary thought.
So on the night of June 14th, 1955, Floyd Holzendorf and Bobby Lincoln took a boat to Manalapan and snuck up to the Chillingworth's beach house. Floyd Holzendorf, wearing a sea captain's hat, pretended that his boat had broken down and needed to use the phone.
This deception, this calculated act of preying on the Chillingworth's kindness, makes the crime even more heinous. It speaks to the perpetrator's cold-heartedness and their ability to manipulate trust. It's a violation not just of the law, but of basic human decency.
It's hard to believe that anyone could be so cruel. As soon as they were inside, Floyd Holzendorf pulled out a gun and took the couple hostage. They were bound, gagged, and forced to walk down to the beach in their pajamas. Can you imagine the terror they must have felt?
It's a heartbreaking scene to imagine. The Chillingworths, known for their compassion and fairness, were suddenly thrust into a nightmare, orchestrated by the very people they were sworn to uphold the law against. It's a betrayal of trust on the most fundamental level.
Tragically, Marjorie's gag came loose, and she screamed. Floyd Holzendorf pistol-whipped her, leaving bloodstains on the steps and the path leading to the beach. They then forced the couple onto the boat and took them several miles offshore.
This methodical, calculated approach to the crime is indicative of a planned act, not a crime of passion. It suggests a level of premeditation that makes the crime all the more disturbing.
Once they were far enough out, Floyd Holzendorf cut the engine. They put weighted belts on the Chillingworths and prepared to throw them overboard. It was at this moment, facing certain death, that Judge Chillingworth turned to his wife and said, "Honey, remember I love you." Marjorie replied, "I love you too."
This final exchange, these last words of love and devotion, highlight the profound tragedy of this case. Two lives filled with love and purpose were brutally extinguished by greed and ambition. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of human cruelty.
It's a gut-wrenching moment that really puts the whole case into perspective.
Yeah. It's a moment that transcends the legal details and speaks to the human cost of this crime. It's a reminder that behind the headlines and court transcripts, there are real people, real families, whose lives were forever shattered. It's a chilling reminder that even in moments of desperation, love and compassion can endure. But for the Chillingworths, that moment of tenderness was tragically cut short.
Floyd Holzendorf, in his drunken confession, uttered the chilling phrase, "Ladies first," and threw Marjorie overboard. She sank instantly. The judge, despite being bound and weighted, tried to stay afloat.
Imagine the sheer terror, the desperate struggle for survival, all while knowing that the person you love most in the world has just been taken from you.
It's truly horrifying. Floyd Holzendorf beat the judge with a shotgun and then wrapped an anchor around his neck before he too disappeared beneath the waves. Their bodies were never recovered.
The cruelty of this act, the deliberate and callous way in which they took those lives, is simply horrifying. It leaves us grappling with the depths of human depravity and the chilling reality that some individuals are capable of unspeakable acts of violence.
And with Floyd Holzendorf's confession in hand, the state had a dilemma. They knew who committed the murders. They had it on tape. But without the bodies of the Chillingworths, securing a conviction wouldn't be easy.
This presented a significant legal challenge in Florida at the time. A murder conviction without a body required at least 2 eyewitnesses to the crime. It seemed like an impossible task, like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
It must have felt like a huge setback for the prosecution. But remember, Bobby Lincoln, the other man, Floyd Holzendorf, implicated in the murders, he was already serving time for moonshining, which basically means illegally producing and selling alcohol.
Moonshining was a common crime in those days, especially in rural areas where access to legal alcohol was limited. It was a way for people to make a living, even if it meant operating outside the law.
And in a twist of fate, Bobby Lincoln agreed to testify against Joe Peel in exchange for immunity from prosecution in the Chillingworth case.
This was a crucial turning point in the case. Bobby Lincoln's testimony, corroborated by Floyd Holzendorf's confession, provided the necessary eyewitnesses to proceed with a murder trial against Joe Peel, even without the victims' bodies. It was a risky move for the prosecution, relying on the testimony of a convicted criminal, but it was their only hope.
Talk about a deal with the devil. But it was enough to bring Joe Peel to trial. And in March of 1961, almost 6 years after the Chillingworths disappeared, Florida's trial of the century began.
The courtroom must have been electric with tension. Imagine the weight of the accusations, the grief of the Chillingworths family, and the media frenzy surrounding this high-profile case.
It was a media circus for sure, with reporters from all over the country flocking to the small Florida town to cover the trial. Bobby Lincoln was brought in from prison shackles, and all to give his chilling account of the murders.
Imagine being in that courtroom, listening to Lincoln recount the details of that night, the fear in the Chillingworths' eyes, the cold-heartedness of the killers. It must have been absolutely riveting.
It's hard to imagine what it must have been like for the Chillingworths family having to relive that horrible night through the testimony of those involved. But amidst all the drama and intrigue, Joe Peel took the stand in his own defense.
This was a bold move, a high-risk, high-reward strategy by taking the stand. Peel opened himself up to cross-examination, but also had the opportunity to directly address the jury and plead his case.
And in a truly audacious move, he admitted to the plot to kill Floyd Holzendorf, the very man whose confession had implicated him in the murders.
This admission was a calculated risk by confessing to a lesser crime. Peel attempted to portray himself as someone capable of wrongdoing but not murder. It was a way to acknowledge his flaws while maintaining his innocence in the Chillingworth case.
But when it came to the Chillingworths' disappearance, he was adamant that he had nothing to do with it. He even offered what seemed like an airtight alibi, claiming he was at home watching the premiere of the $64,000 Question, a popular game show at the time on the night of the murders.
This alibi, if true, would have made it impossible for Peel to have been involved in the murders. But for the prosecution, it was just another piece of Peel's elaborate web of deception. They had to convince the jury that his alibi was just another lie, another attempt to manipulate the truth.
So it was a classic courtroom battle, with the prosecution trying to paint Peel as a manipulative mastermind and Peel trying to present himself as a victim of circumstance. But in the end, the jury saw through his lies.
Despite Peel's attempts to control the narrative, the weight of the evidence against him, including the damning confession from Floyd Holzendorf and the corroborating testimony of Bobby Lincoln, proved too much to overcome.
He was found guilty of being an accessory to murder, a lesser charge than the prosecution had hoped for, but a conviction nonetheless.
Being an accessory to murder essentially means that while Peel didn't directly commit the murders, he was involved in planning or facilitating them. It recognizes his culpability in the crime without holding him solely responsible.
And he was sentenced to 2 life terms. A harsh punishment, but one that many felt was justified, given the gravity of the crime.
This sentence, while not the death penalty, ensured that Peel would spend the rest of his life behind bars, paying for his role in the Chillingworths' deaths. It was a victory for justice, a message that even those in positions of power would be held accountable for their actions.
And Floyd Holzendorf, the man who carried out the murders, he was initially sentenced to death, but his sentence was later commuted, likely due to his cooperation in securing Peel's conviction.
Commuting a sentence means reducing it to a less severe punishment. In Holzendorf's case, it likely meant a life sentence instead of execution. This is often done in cases where a defendant provides valuable information or assistance to the prosecution.
He died in prison years later, never experiencing freedom again. It's a bittersweet outcome. While the Chillingworth family never got to see their loved one's killers face the ultimate punishment, they did find solace in the fact that both men were held accountable for their crimes.
It's a reminder that justice is complex and often imperfect. While the ideal outcome might have been a harsher punishment for both men, the fact that they were both convicted and imprisoned provides a sense of closure, a recognition that their actions had consequences.
But even behind bars, Joe Peel continued to spin his web of deception. He maintained his innocence throughout his imprisonment and was eventually paroled in 1982 due to failing health.
Parole is the conditional release of a prisoner before the completion of their sentence, typically granted based on good behavior or extenuating circumstances like failing health. In Peel's case, it allowed him to spend his final years outside of prison walls.
But his release sparked outrage among those who believed he should have served his full sentence. They argued that his lack of remorse and continued insistence on his innocence showed that he was still a danger to society.
This parole granted, despite his lack of remorse, further fueled public outrage and raised questions about the justice system's ability to truly hold criminals accountable. It sparked a debate about the purpose of punishment. Is it solely about retribution, or is there also an element of rehabilitation?
It definitely sparked a debate about the purpose of the justice system and whether or not it truly served the victims in this case. But the most shocking twist came just 9 days before Joe Peel's death.
Just when it seemed like the story had reached its conclusion, there was one final act, one last attempt by Joe Peel to control the narrative.
He granted an interview to the Miami Herald, a deathbed confession of sorts. But instead of taking full responsibility for his role in the Chillingworth's deaths, he said, and I quote, "I'm guilty of not using my influence to stop what was going to happen, and I could." What do you make of that?
This so-called confession is a masterpiece of manipulation, a final attempt by Peel to shape his legacy. He tries to paint himself as a passive bystander, racked with guilt for not intervening. It's a subtle shift in blame, acknowledging wrongdoing, but minimizing his role in orchestrating those murders.
It's infuriating he had the power to prevent those murders, and he chose not to. And in a chilling coincidence, he died at the age of 58, the same age Judge Chillingworth was when he and his wife were brutally murdered.
It's a chilling parallel, a reminder of the cyclical nature of violence and the enduring consequences of our choices. It makes you wonder if, on some level, Peel was haunted by his actions, if the guilt and the weight of his crimes eventually caught up with him.
Maybe, but here's the thing that really sticks with me. Joe Peel orchestrated this whole horrific scheme just so he could keep his position as magistrate and continue his shady dealings with the underworld, and in the end, he was forced to resign anyway. It makes you wonder, was it all worth it? The innocent lives lost, the families shattered, all for nothing.
It's a stark reminder of the destructive power of greed and unchecked ambition. This case serves as a cautionary tale, a dark mirror reflecting the consequences of choosing power and self-preservation over integrity and compassion.
Absolutely. The Chillingworth case is a tragedy on so many levels. It exposes the vulnerabilities of a justice system grappling with organized crime, the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, and the enduring power of truth, no matter how long it takes to surface.
And it also highlights the resilience of the human spirit despite the horrors they faced. The Chillingworth's family continued to seek justice, their unwavering pursuit, a testament to the enduring power of love and the need for accountability.
Their dedication to seeking justice for their loved ones is truly inspiring, and it brings us to a thought-provoking question for you to ponder. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Joe Peel had been held fully accountable for his earlier ethical violations?
It's a question worth considering, not just in the context of this case, but in our own lives as well, when we tolerate or excuse unethical behavior, when we look the other way, or choose silence over accountability. We create a breeding ground for corruption and injustice.
It's a chilling reminder that even seemingly small transgressions can have ripple effects, setting in motion a chain of events that can lead to devastating consequences.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to speak out against injustice, to hold those in power accountable, and to strive for a world where such tragedies are not repeated.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of another deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Chillingworth case. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
If you're interested in delving deeper into this case, be sure to check out the Chillingworth podcast. It's an excellent resource for those who want to learn more about this fascinating and tragic story.
And be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations into history, true crime, and the mysteries that continue to captivate us. Until next time, keep those minds curious. And remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.